Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Joyner, and I am a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Bath. And I have been asked to give you a very brief talk on memory illusions and their implications for everyday life. Okay, so and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to give you two demonstrations of how fragile our memories are. Okay, so hopefully you will enjoy this. It's a bit of fun, but hopefully also it will sort of make you aware that our memories are not as reliable as we think they are. Anyway, let's move on. Okay. Oh, technology. Here we go. All right. As I say, most of us think that our memories are a bit like a video camera and that they keep an accurate record of all our past events. And what I'm going to do today is try and show you that they're not as reliable as we think they are. And I'm going to do this with two different types of demonstrations. So the first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little memory test. Now, I'm going to read out 14 words, okay? Now, I'm not expecting you to remember all 14 words. And some of you who may have done psychology may know approximately how many words you will remember, because it is a famous law in psychology, first of all developed by George Miller in the 1950s. And he basically said that we can remember 7 plus or minus 2 things. So you're likely to remember about between 5 and 9 words, but because you're young, like me, you'll probably be more up near the 9 words than the 5 words. But anyway, let us see. So are you ready? Now, one thing you can't do is cheat, okay? So don't write things down as I read them, because that will spoil it. Okay, so put down your pens and pencils and just listen as I read out the 14 words. So, are you ready? Here we go. Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy. Okay, so there were the 14 words. All right, so try and remember them. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 4 words. Now, which of these words did I just say? Okay, so think about it. I could have said more than one, so it's quite possible that I said more than one. All right. Okay, so which ones do you think I said? Now, probably quite a lot of you thought I said snooze. Okay, and probably some of you thought I said sleep. Now, the interesting thing is I didn't say sleep. Okay, now it's a bit hard to do this online, but I have done this many times, and these are approximately the numbers of people who say snooze and the number of people who say sleaze. Now, this was out of a group of about 30, okay? So you can see about 2/3 said snooze and about 20 said sleep, okay? Now, as I say, this is such a strong effect, and lots of people will refuse to believe I didn't say sleep, okay? I've done it in live audiences, and literally people have shouted at me, yes, you did. Okay. Now, the great thing about this video is you can go back and you can check that I didn't say sleep. All right. So what the heck is going on? And the other interesting thing is some people will have quite a strong memory of me saying sleep. So what is going on? How can we explain it? Well, this phenomena is known as false memories. Okay. And it was sort of first discovered by an American called John Dees in the 50s, but was fully explored by another two Americans called Roediger and McDermott. Okay. And they have shown that this phenomena is really, really robust. It's one of the most robust phenomena in psychology. And also they have come up with a number of explanations. And one of these explanations is like this. Okay, so imagine your memory is a network and each node represents a word. Okay, and what happens is when I say that word like snooze, that node gets activated. Okay, and it gets activated, and some of that activation gets spread to neighboring nodes, which are related to the word snooze. So what is happening is, if you noticed, I said a lot of words which were related to sleep. So if you imagine all the nodes around sleep got activated. So much activation spread to the node sleep that some of you thought I actually said sleep. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is you can't tell the difference. All right. For those who thought I said sleep, that memory feels exactly the same as the memory for the word snooze. Okay. So it's like we can't tell that we have a false memory. Okay. So we don't know this. And so if we're asked to say anything, we'll believe that it happened. All right. So this is a powerful phenomenon which shows how fragile memory is, because I manipulated your memory by just reading out 14 words. Okay. And this has massive implications for things like eyewitness testimony. You know, how much, do people, how much what somebody has said is actually true. And there have been numerous cases in the past where people have said something happened and then it turns out that it didn't happen. And they believed it happened, but later, sort of usually some sort of forensic evidence or DNA evidence has shown that this possibly didn't happen. So again, this has shown how fragile memory is. Now, I'm going to do another demonstration, which is also going to show another remarkable feature about memory and how we don't always remember things that we are exposed to a lot. Okay. Now I'm going to do this by using the Apple logo. Okay. Now, most of you come across the Apple logo probably in your everyday life. Every day you probably see it in one form or another, possibly because you have some Apple device, possibly because you see other people's Apple device. But anyway, it's incredibly prevalent in the everyday life and you see it a lot. And so you probably think you have a very good memory of what the Apple logo looks like. So what I first want you to do is to think, how confident are you that you can recognize the Apple logo? And what I want you to do is rate this confidence on a 1 to 5 point scale from very confident to very unconfident. Okay, so sort of write down briefly whether you're very confident, moderately confident, neither confident or unconfident, moderately unconfident, or very unconfident. Okay, so write that down. And now what I'm going to do is show you 6 versions of the Apple logo, one of which is the correct version? Let's have a look. There we go. So have a look at these 6 versions of the Apple logo. Which one of those 6 is the correct one? It's not so easy, is it? Shall we have a look? Have you noted which one you think is the correct one? Well, it's the 5th one. Okay, so just to check, we'll go back, show you that it's the 5th one that was the most correct. Now, in the original study by Blake and colleagues, they found that overall, under half guessed it correctly. All right. Now, slightly over half who had Apple products of some form guessed it correctly, but not massively over half. And 30% who only had PC products guessed it correctly. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look at how confident people are, they're very confident that they're going to guess the correct one. And probably that's the case with you, that you were very confident that you were going to guess the correct one. But actually, your memory of something which is everywhere in your everyday life is not as accurate as you thought it was. Now, this study is basically one from a long line of studies which have shown that we don't remember these sort of everyday objects. The first one was looked at penny coins, okay? There has also been an interesting one that looked at typeface, lowercase g. Now, which one of these do you think is the lowercase g that you see in many typefaces? All right, have a quick look. Which one do you think it is? Well, it's actually number 1. And again, most people don't get this right, okay? So that's an interesting one. There's also been one about flags. Flags, I love flags. I mean, I love flags. So, you know, I think I will try and do the study myself to see if come out with similar facts. And they found a similar thing with the American flag, that people, even though it's everywhere, especially if you go to the States, it's literally everywhere. Virtually every public building has the flag up, and lots of sort of homes have it up. So you would think they would know this, but actually they don't. Okay? And then, so lots and lots of studies that have shown that we don't have a good memory of everyday objects. So in conclusion, what I hope I've shown you is that our memory is not as reliable as we think it is. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that. I certainly did. It's always fun to show these sort of demonstrations, especially as they're so counterintuitive. Anyway, thanks very much.
Hi, and welcome to this Seren Masterclass on memory and geography. My name is Dr. Kate Evans, and I'm a human geographer. So what do human geographers do? Well, in the past, geographers looked to create models of how people behave, how we use space and interact with each other and our environment. Increasingly, many geographers, as well as sociologists, historians, and other theorists who study human behaviour, have come to appreciate the importance of emotions and feelings, and how these differences of opinion and experience can offer invaluable insights into how our world shapes us and how we shape our world. So in the case of memory, memories can have very powerful effects on our understanding of the world and our relationships with place. We could look at memory and geography through the lens of cultural and social ideas and how they're commemorated. Heritage, empire, sculptures, naming of streets and places, for example. Or how memories of past events shape societies and their sense of self. Ideas of nationality and culture, for example, often draw on a sense of collective or shared experience, an idea of a common history or heritage. Sometimes these memories and their meanings change over time, and occasionally result in dramatic rejections of symbols of old ways of thinking or doing things. For example, the removal of the Colston statue recently in Bristol. But today, I want to look at the often subtle and very personal ways in which memories can influence not only how we think about particular places, but also our everyday behaviour. I'll be focusing my attention in particular on the ideas of memory, the city, and the body. Maybe this sounds like a difficult idea to get to grips with, but I want you to remember that I'm talking about the sort of things you do and the sort of spaces that you visit and pass through every day of your lives. So as we go through this masterclass, I'm hoping that you'll be able to draw on your own ideas and experiences and memories, and maybe come out at the other end with a fresh perspective on your own places and also on geography as a subject. So here we go. Spaces shape us and nudge us into certain forms of learnt behaviour. Here's one example. A simple white line and some painted graphics, which, as if by magic, seem to shape the behaviours of people who use the path. Cyclists on one side, pedestrians on the other. It's not legally binding, and there are no other instructions informing users of how to behave and use the path. And of course, there are numerous other users that aren't covered by these symbols. Skateboarders, skaters, scooters, dog walkers, pushchairs, wheelchairs, and so on. But should anyone find themselves on the wrong side, either deliberately or by straying accidentally, there's usually another user who'll point out your error with a comment or a tut. I'm sure that you can think of other ways that spaces are designed to nudge us into certain behaviours. But there are some people who deliberately seek to disrupt and mess about with these design conventions, and also with expectations of what bodies can or can't do and where they should or shouldn't go. And here's an example from my own research. Diary entry. Pebble-dashed walls, 3 or 4 foot high, 6 inches wide, brutal and uncanny, a strange place to play, yet very enticing. The tiny nerves and muscles in my legs tick and twitch as I remember my last encounter with this place. Walking up to railings that surround the sunken square, I feel conspicuous, but there's no one else here, just me and the walls. My stomach rises, and I swallow back the nervous tension that's collecting in my throat. I feel my hands getting warmer, and my eyes narrow slightly as I focus on the ground below. Remembering last time I was here, the feeling of catching my foot on the edge of the first wall, my leg trailing behind me, instinctively throwing my arms out to prevent me landing on my face. I succeed, but as my hands strike the floor, my right shin drops under the momentum of my hips and legs and grazes sharply against the pebble-dashed wall. I disentangle myself from my inelegant position, check the damage. Palms grazed, not too badly. Shin beginning to throb as blood pools to the point of impact. 4 or 5 parallel lines of jagged cuts. Nothing too serious, but the skin is already dark purple and feeling tight, making it difficult to bend the leg. Then it begins to bleed, and with blood running down and pooling in my sock and the tongue of my trainer, and having no success with attempts to stem the flow, I'm forced to sit out the last few minutes of the session. I left some skin in Vauxhall. I'd been practicing parkour that day, learning to move and play with these odd structures, encountered every day in the city, and also with my body, learning what was and wasn't possible, and challenging or displacing my comfort zones. There's something a bit unsettling about being and seeing an adult playing in public. Parkour, or the art of displacement as it's sometimes known, plays with the comfort zones of the body and the ways that it engages with space by challenging and unsettling its assumptions of itself, as well as those that society places on it. Parkour plays with movement and spatial conventions. Walls become launch pads and gaps become flight paths from one surface to another. Movement is celebrated as a whole body event, and crawling, jumping, kicking off and climbing means that there's no route that's out of bounds. People who practice parkour, or tracers, sometimes freerunners as they're known, view parkour as a personal journey. The only limits are personal, which isn't to say that there are no limits, but that these are bound up with physical abilities, emotions, and yes, memories. Parkour leaves traces on the bodies of those who practice it, and the legacy of these physical performances and the conversation between body and place, increasing strength, agility, confidence, and sometimes bruises and scars, reveal the whole body nature of recollection and memory, and they challenge the assumption that memory is just about the past. So as I stood and surveyed the space below, I felt a mixture of fear, excitement and embarrassment, just as I felt that day when I injured myself. But I also felt eagerness to climb down and touch these surfaces, to have another go at climbing and jumping over them. And I felt these sensations not just in my mind, but through my whole body. My stomach lurched with recollection of the dull, not yet pain of the impact to my shin, but also with the excitable frustration of not being able to play out the movements that I could see in my mind. And even now, several years later, I can still feel these sensations and remember them as I sit here at my desk revisiting these encounters with you through these photos and diary excerpts. Through these interactions, tracers can build highly personal relationships and insights into taken for granted and even neglected or forgotten spaces. And in turn, these places become absorbed and ingrained into their physical muscle memory. And just as parkour leaves traces and memories on the bodies of those who practice it, it also leaves its mark on the places where it's practiced. Scuff marks on walls, for example. But also, when you begin to move around your environment in different ways, you begin to instinctively see new routes emerging, new pathways open up to you. And in the same way, even as a bystander, once you've seen someone else moving through or across space differently, you can't unsee it. And that memory too becomes part of your spatial experience. So over time, as the traces skills grow and develop, alternative pathways may begin to open up. And they approach space with what's been described as a parkour vision, or a physically engaged way of seeing their surroundings. This means seeing pathways that override those shown on maps, and which might be unimaginable to those who move following the paths laid down by town planners. Sometimes tensions may arise between different users of the city as paths cross in unexpected and unnerving ways. Tracers, and we can also look at skateboarders in a similar way, challenge ideas and conventions of public order and what acceptable behaviour in public space actually means. This illustration is my personal take on a training session in Castle Square, a public space in Swansea. It changes constantly, and it's a tapestry of half-thoughts, past journeys and route making. It's also in both English and Welsh, because I don't always think in either one or the other language, but both. Embarrassment, elation, pride, fear, pain, all combine in this mental map of the space. Your map would be different, and in fact, the square is very different in the evening as the nighttime geography of the city emerges. Different routes, different days, different thoughts, same space on the map. These sort of sketches try and give a voice to the bits of experience and place that maps simply can't. The map too is redrawn with every new visit. And here we can see other ways of using the same site at a different time. Here is a Jubilee celebration from a few years ago. Often temporary and fleeting, these are spaces that are brought to the fore and are animated by the actions or events which take place in them. On another day, we see the same space, this time with the fountain dyed red for St. David's Day, or purple at the start of September to celebrate the idea of Swansea City being a safe space at night. And the idea of these activities and these events taking place in the square is that they linger in people's mind. Once you've seen the fountain dyed these colours, the hope is that you'll remember and associate Swansea then with that safe nighttime space. Another lane, another city, this time in Bristol. And this is the winner of the Playable City Award in Bristol called Shadowing, where participants were encouraged to play with shadows cast in an alleyway. The idea that shadows in alleys are often threatening things and things to be scared of and avoided. In this case, they become a playground for the over 100,000 people who actively participated in this activity over the course of 6 weeks. Back to Swansea, and this time a graffiti wall, painted as part of the Art Across the City event that happens each year. This one's opposite the main train station in the city centre and celebrates different aspects of Swansea history. At any other time, graffiti done in the same place without being part of a sanctioned event might be seen as a form of vandalism, in the same way as the Colston statue removal was viewed by some not as a cultural statement of solidarity and support for the Black Lives Matter movement, but as an instance of vandalism. My point is that while all reappropriations of space are driven by personal urges, some are wrong in some people's eyes, not all personal takes on public spaces are extreme. Desire lines, such as the ones in this photo, stray from the path, and they emerge from finding your own way, and they're evidence that lots of us do it. So we need to think carefully about how we go about accommodating and encouraging diverse users of space in the city, and about how seeing other people's actions and the memory of seeing alternative ways of using space can maybe make us think in different ways about the spaces around us. And instead of crowd control, we might instead want to look at play and playful disorder, and the possibility of giving responsibility back to people for their own actions. And this is how human geographers do their fieldwork, at times. I hope this has given you a new insight into maybe what geography is, but hopefully, more than that, a new way of looking and engaging with the spaces around you, and a new way of thinking about memory. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for your time. Take care.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's talk on memory. My name's Alex Owens, and I'm a PhD student in my final year at Lancaster University, and my subject specialism is in Buddhism, Orientalism and environmentalism. But as part of that, I discover and I talk about this idea that we're going to be talking about today, which is genealogy. Now, this might seem a bit scary, because, this question, genealogy, unpacking our collective memories of the past in order to explore the present. But it's actually not as scary as it sounds. Basically, what this question is asking is, how is it that we understand a certain thing in a certain way today? So, for example, in my own research, there are a lot of stereotypes about Buddhism, such as Buddhism is scientific, or Buddhists are peaceful, and I use the genealogical method to examine what happened in history to gradually make these views become mainstream. So, the objectives of today's session are to gain an understanding of what genealogy itself is, to explore how genealogy relates to history and our collective memory of the past, to explore how some key figures think about genealogy, and to inspire you to consider how the genealogical method can be used can be thought about in everyday life. So let's start with the origins of the term genealogy. A genealogy, according to Oxford dictionaries, is a written record of ancestry, such as a family tree or one's pedigree, one's ancestors or their character, or one's ancestral derivation. So basically, genealogy is about the past. It's about tracking something as it's moved through time. For example, as you can see on the screen, we've got the Weasley family tree from Harry Potter. Now, in a family tree, what we do is we have a starting point and we can trace, how this point is linked to this point. Where did Ron come along? How is Ron related to Harry? Through Ginny, and so on and so on. So genealogy is about tracing this kind of history. Now, a really important point to point out here, though, is that in a genealogy, we're not always looking for the origin of something. So in this Weasley family tree, we've got Molly and Arthur at the top. Now, we know that that's not the start of the Weasley family history overall. It's not the origin point. There's probably generations and generations of Weasleys running around everywhere. But for our particular genealogy, our particular frame of research, they're the starting point. So it's not about finding the origins, it's about understanding how and why something's been transmitted in the way it has over a certain period of time. And one of the ways in which things and ideas are transmitted is through memory. So I'm going to start with this hopefully well-known quote from the musical Hamilton, where at the end of the entire play, one of the lines is, "Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives? Who dies? Who tells your story?" And so it's all about whose story do we tell in the present. That's what genealogy is. What memories have lasted the test of time? You might have heard of the quote, "History is written by the victors." And so it's about understanding what we as societies, individuals and governments use from the past, and how we reorganize our memories of the past in order to suit the needs of the present day. So, for an example from my own research, this term, Buddhism is scientific. This is promoted by those in and outside the tradition today because science is seen as a dominant force in the present day. But Buddhism hasn't always been scientific. This came about because of a group of thinkers who, around the end of the 19th century, changed the perception of what Buddhism itself was. On this PowerPoint, you can see a lot of people sat on a stage. This is the World Parliament of Religions in 1893 in Chicago. And at this convention, various members of the Christian community and other faith communities came together to discuss how religion itself was going to move forward into the 20th century. Now, before this point, Buddhism was perceived by people in the West and Christians as this illogical tradition. It was nihilistic. That means it was kind of like nothing exists, therefore what's the point in anything? And, it wasn't perceived as in very high regard at all in the circles of, these sort of people sat on the stage here. But at the World Parliament of Religions, this all changed, because at the same time, there was members of that community going through what is now described retrospectively as the Victorian crisis of faith. And that's that scientific developments were challenging Christian thought. So all of these people were suddenly having to think, how can we still be religious in light of modern scientific discoveries? And actually what happened during this time was that Buddhism became rebranded, particularly at the World Parliament of Religions in 1893, to be seen as this scientific religion. It was seen as, because it didn't have a specific deity in the same way that Christianity does, it was perceived as maybe like a middle way between religion and science. And so actually what we see at the World Parliament of Religions was a lot of thinkers portraying Buddhism, and these are people from Buddhist traditions themselves, portraying it in a way that made it seem scientific to the Western audience. And then what happens? Well, this Western audience picks it up. Oh, if I'm being told that Buddhism's scientific, it must be. And so they perpetuate this idea that Buddhism's scientific. Now, the result of this isn't just that then these white Christians are all saying Buddhism is scientific, but then this idea loops back in on itself to the point where now today we've got key figures in Buddhism, such as the Dalai Lama, perpetuating this idea that Buddhism is scientific. And so we can use the genealogical method and the cultural memories of the past to explore how and why this sort of statement has just become so mainstream today by key scholars and thinkers, but also the general public. So now to give you a taste of what genealogy is, how scholars themselves talk about genealogy, I'm going to explore some key figures who've explored it. So first up, we've got Friedrich Nietzsche, who's a very well-known German philosopher, and some of you may or may not have come across him already in your religious studies or your philosophy courses at school. So, as we can see on the screen here, we've got two quotes from him. In this text that we're quoting from, on the use and abuse of history, Nietzsche explored how humanity cannot function separate from its own history. In fact, as we can see in the second quote, where it says, "For man says, I remember, and envies the beast which immediately forgets and sees each moment really perish, sink back into the cloud and night, and vanish forever." Nietzsche seems to be envying these beasts or animals that appear to be able to forget their past from instant to instant. He's jealous that their memory is not as good as ours as humans. So he suggests that we as humans are stuck in this system where our memories of the past are constantly being brought back up and impacting our present. So he also discusses this idea of genealogy in his book On the Genealogy of Morals, where he uses this method of, okay, this is what's happening in the present. How do I look back into the past to see where it's come from? He actually unpacks how morality itself has become a thing in European thought. Where did our moral laws come from? And this was something, before Nietzsche that was maybe previously considered to be immobile or unchanging. Well, the laws came from this place and they've never changed. Well, Nietzsche questions that in this entire book. He says, well, no, we can actually trace back where British laws today have come from. If we go back to the Greeks, we go back to the Romans, we can actually perceive how certain innovations in our own laws are a result of the past. Then we move on to a maybe more contemporary figure such as Michel Foucault, who was a French philosopher. Now, he took Nietzsche's notion of genealogy and really made it popular in the 20th century. He says that genealogy does not pretend to go back in time to restore an unbroken continuity that operates beyond dispersion and forgotten things. Its duty is to demonstrate that the past actively exists in the present, and it continues to secretly animate the present. So in the quote on this slide, we can see that Foucault is arguing that the present always contains in it memories of the past. For him, the genealogical method is a way of exploring the past out of a critical concern for the present. So how can we possibly understand where we are now if we don't understand where we came from? So he took this notion further in his idea of counter-memory. Now, this is a practice of memory formation that's social and it's political, and it basically is one that suggests that the way in which stories are told by official streams such as governments and official histories is manipulated in a way to make us believe one thing or another. And he suggests that actually we should do this idea of counter-memory, where we should practice genealogy and look into these things ourselves, because often things like mass media only tell the certain story that they want to tell. That's not necessarily how history itself unraveled. And so he uses genealogy as this way of putting history under the microscope, exploring every intricacy of history itself and unpacking where our cultural memories come from, and to be honest, whether or not they actually fall in line with what happened. And then we've got this final thinker, the Saudi-born cultural anthropologist TALAL ASAD. And in Formations of the Secular, he writes, if instead we were to attend an older sense of cause is that which is the answer to the question, why? We would ask about the reformation of historical events in order to understand why their meaning is no longer what it was. We have to discover what people do with and to ideas and practices. So this might seem like quite a complicated quotation, but actually what ASAD is asking us to do here, or telling us that genealogy can help us do, is unpack what people have done to ideas that means that they are viewed in the way they are in the present. It also helps us understand that no one thing or idea is fixed. Every notion is constantly being changed in relation to its use in the present day. And what makes up that present day? Well, it's our memories. It's which memories we've chosen to take, which memories we've chosen to leave behind. So our memory is subjective and causing this constant change of ideas. And so if something suddenly becomes relevant again from the past, our memories of that thing might suddenly change as well. So for example, I live in Leeds, which has got a great canal going from Leeds to Liverpool. And at the moment, I just think of it as a great route to run along. But imagine if suddenly all the cars and trains in the world just disappeared. What's currently considered an outdated mode of transport, the barge, might suddenly become relevant again. And if it does, that will cause us to re-examine the way we talk about the history of canals more generally. In this example, cars and trains are a blip and not necessarily a form of progress. And so in the same way, our ideas and memories of something can shift and change depending on the present. So, genealogy is important because it can reveal how our collective cultural memory of things from the past not only forms our present day languages and ideas, but it also demonstrates how this cultural memory often eradicates elements of the past that are not essential for the dominant forces of the present. Now, I know this is quite a heavy conclusion, so let's bring this conversation back to everyday life. Looking at these questions, we can have a think about, where did football come from? Now, we can look at this, it's not just in the recent UK history, but more generally, where did ball sports themselves originate? Why did they originate? What key moments in history have had to happen that have allowed football to become such a globally recognised sport today? These are the sort of questions that a genealogy of football will start to answer. In the same way, where did the idea of celebrity come from? What is the difference between a celebrity and a hero? How long have societies venerated individuals for certain qualities or status? And do celebrities today differ from those of the past? If so, what are the differences? Genealogy helps us unpack this cultural memory and see the differences between maybe a celebrity now compared to a celebrity in ancient Greece, let's say. And then the final example, why is being connected presented as a good thing by environmentalists, scientists, and big companies today? And this is one of the key questions of my own genealogy and my research. What has happened in the Western context that's meant that interconnectedness has become viewed in such a positive light? Now, looking at these three, you can see how genealogy, we can bring it into everyday life, we can bring it into activities, sports, or we can start thinking about these bigger concepts like Nietzsche did about morality itself, or like I'm trying to do, this idea of interconnectedness. And so that's just a brief run through of genealogy and how it can link to memory today. So I just want to say a massive thank you for coming along today. And if you did want to have a bonus challenge, it would be great if you could come up with a genealogical topic of research and start discussing it with your family and friends. Now, in order to kind of do this and understand how something is perceived today, chat about it in the present. How do I perceive football right now? And then let's see how far back in history you can trace its roots. And then also have a think about how you can examine the many changes that have happened to, let's say, football, for it to be perceived in the way it is today. This should lead to lots of great conversations. Feel free to use the internet, but it's just a really interesting way of seeing how our memory maybe isn't as objective and fixed as we think.
Diolch yn fawr, a gobeithio'n wir eich bod chi wedi mwynhau. I do hope that you found those stimulating, and remember to take a look at those resources to further explore the topics that you've heard about. Cyfle drwy'r adnoddau yma i chi archwilio'n annibynnol. Nod y gynhadledd yw eich ysbrydoli chi ar gyfer eich camau nesaf. And we do hope that the conference has inspired you and provided you with the information to assist you with taking your next steps. Ac mae'r cymorth ar eich cyfer yn ddiben draw. The support doesn't end here. We have a network of 12 Seren Hub coordinators who work closely with schools across Wales to keep you updated and informed on further opportunities and provide you with direct support and advice at a local level. Help llaw ym mhob cornel ar hyd y daith. Felly cadwch mewn cysylltiad â nhw a manteisiwch ar y cyfan. Diolch yn fawr i holl gyfranwyr y gynhadledd yma. Thank you to everyone for your insights and advice during this conference and for your continued support for Seren. Rydych chi'n taflu goleuni gwerthfawr ar y cyfan. Am y tro felly, wrtha i a'r tîm i gyd, cadwch yn ddiogel a mwynhewch eich siwrne. Stay safe, stay well and stay learning gyda with Seren.